Welcome to the debate. Today we are turning our attention to an environment where the margin for error is, well, essentially zero. Commercial shipping vessels.
Right.
Imagine being hundreds or sometimes thousands of miles from shore. You're living and working in this massive steel ecosystem where every single everyday habit has to be evaluated for extreme risk. And right now, the maritime industry is grappling with the rapid proliferation of e-cigarettes or vapes among seafarers.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
It is. So the central question we are examining today is this. Should shipping companies treat e-cigarettes under standard pre-existing smoking policies, or do the unique hazards of vaping necessitate a comprehensive zero-tolerance ban across all vessels? And frankly, I will be arguing that a comprehensive zero-tolerance ban is absolutely essential here. The unpredictable device hazards, the extreme global legal liabilities at customs, and the sheer failure of existing policies to contain discrete vaping make an outright ban the only viable path forward.
And I'm going to have to push back on the idea of a total ban. I argue that we really need to be managing e-cigarettes under strict, pre-existing smoking policies instead. Outright prohibition completely ignores the behavioral realities of modern crew members. I mean, what happens when you ban something that is deeply ingrained in a workforce?
Well, you inadvertently increase the risk. You drive the use entirely underground into the most vulnerable areas of the ship. I think to really understand why a ban is necessary, we have to look at how e-cigarettes introduce entirely new, unmanageable categories of risk to the maritime environment. Risks that traditional smoking simply does not possess. We aren't just talking about the health consequences of inhaling vapor. We are dealing with a distinct hardware hazard.
The batteries.
Exactly, the batteries. Vapes are powered by lithium-ion batteries. In the unmonitored spaces of a ship, like an empty crew cabin, a damaged or overcharged battery poses a severe acute fire risk. And beyond the physical danger to the vessel, we are also facing escalating international legal consequences. Governments globally are cracking down heavily on e-cigarettes.
Yeah, the legal landscape is definitely shifting.
Drastically. If a vessel arrives at a customs checkpoint with undeclared devices on board, the consequences are catastrophic. We're talking vessel delays, multi-million-dollar fines, and actual prison time for the crew. Ultimately, because vapes are explicitly designed to be discreet and often odorless, they bypass standard designated smoking areas entirely. They render traditional smoking policies completely ineffective. A total zero-tolerance ban is the only safeguard that actually protects the vessel, the cargo, and the crew.
I come at it from a different way, and I want to be perfectly clear right out of the gate. I acknowledge the very real dangers of e-cigarettes. The health evidence is highly concerning, and the fire risks associated with lithium-ion batteries are absolutely not to be taken lightly in a maritime setting. However, standard smoking policies, which rely on designated, fire-controlled, and heavily ventilated areas, provide the most practical and effective framework for managing these exact risks.
But do they really?
They do, because we have to look at the demographics of who is actually sailing these ships today. We have a younger, Gen Z seafaring workforce. For many of them, navigating the intense isolation and stress of months at sea involves vaping. It has been widely adopted as a lifestyle choice. Implementing a zero-tolerance ban on a practice so deeply ingrained is practically unenforceable. Moreover, it creates a wildly absurd double standard.
How so?
Well, if traditional, demonstrably deadly combustible cigarettes are still permitted in designated zones, why are we banning vapes? Prohibition will inevitably drive vaping into hiding. You will end up with crew members charging volatile batteries in hidden cabin outlets and exposing their roommates to secondhand vapor in completely unmonitored areas. You end up amplifying the exact dangers the ban attempts to eliminate.
Let's unpack that physical danger first, because fire is arguably the single most immediate existential threat to any vessel at sea. Picture a cargo ship 500 miles off the coast in the middle of the night. If a fire breaks out, emergency response is completely constrained to the personnel on board. There is no fire department to call.
Right, it's just the crew.
Just the curdle. Now, traditional cigarettes, for all their massive faults, are entirely predictable. We know exactly how a smoldering cigarette behaves, and the industry has spent decades learning to manage it with heavy ashtrays, strict designated zones, and fireproof receptacles. Vapes, however, introduce a volatile explosion risk from those lithium-ion batteries.
But is the risk truly that different from other electronics?
It absolutely is. And the military data supports this. The U.S. Navy actually documented this heavily. Between 2015 and 2016 alone, they recorded 15 distinct cases of e-cigarette battery malfunctions aboard their ships, submarines, and aircraft.
15 cases in just a year?
Exactly. And remember, that is within a highly disciplined, heavily regulated military environment. These small cells can overheat, ignite, and literally explode when damaged, or even when just left on a charger too long. I see why you think standard policies might work, but let me give you a different perspective. It is the sheer unpredictability of the hardware that makes it uniquely dangerous. Imagine a crew member working a grueling 12-hour shift in the engine room. They leave their vape plugged into a cheap, generic wall charger in their cabin. That device goes into thermal runaway. An explosion in an empty cabin can turn into an uncontrollable blaze long before the ship's fire suppression teams can even mobilize. You can't regulate that unpredictability.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are isolating e-cigarettes as if they're the only items on a massive commercial vessel powered by lithium-ion batteries. Every single seafarer walking up that gangway brings a smartphone on board. Most of them are bringing laptops, tablets, wireless headphones, maybe a portable gaming console to pass the time in their off hours. Ships successfully manage literally thousands of lithium-ion devices every single voyage. The inherent issue here is not the lithium-ion battery itself. It is the unmonitored, covert charging of that battery.
But a vape is built differently than a laptop.
It is. But the behavioral response to a ban is what worries me. When you ban e-cigarettes entirely, you absolutely guarantee that crew members will hide them. They aren't going to toss them overboard just because a memo came down from the corporate office. They will charge them under pillows, so officers don't see them during cabin inspections. They will plug them into unauthorized, modified power strips tucked away inside metal lockers.
Even so,
If instead you place vapes firmly under standard smoking policies, you force their use and their management into monitored, fire-controlled zones. We could easily mandate that charging only occurs in designated crew lounges with proper hardwired fire detection systems and standardized electrical outlets. Regulation brings the hazard into the light. Prohibition forces it into the most vulnerable, unmonitored spaces of the ship.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. A laptop or smartphone is fundamentally designed as a stable computational device. An e-cigarette is a specialized heating element. It is explicitly designed to draw intense, rapid current from a very small battery to vaporize liquid at high temperatures. The failure modes are just completely different. But even if we could perfectly manage the fire risk in a designated lounge, we still can't ignore what's actually coming out of the device. The air quality in these sealed maritime environments is a whole different beast.
You're referring to the vapor itself?
yes, the clinical evidence regarding the health impact of vaping is mounting incredibly rapidly, and in the sealed compartments of a ship where air is constantly recirculated, this becomes a critical crew-wide issue. A 2025 study from Johns Hopkins University definitively linked exclusive e-cigarette use to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, and highly elevated blood pressure. A 2019 trial published in the European Heart Journal demonstrated that even short-term vaping severely impairs vascular function.
I don't dispute the health data.
But think about how it impacts a seafaring crew specifically. This is a workforce that requires peak physical readiness at all times to handle heavy machinery and emergency protocols. Yet, a 2023 review in Frontiers in Public Health documented elevated heart rates, increased breathing frequency, and reduced oxygen saturation after just 20 minutes of e-cigarette use. And when we look at secondhand exposure in a sealed maritime environment, The 2020 indoor air study is vital. It showed that indoor vaping significantly raises fine particles, nicotine, aldehydes, and heavy metals in the surrounding air. Because vaping is so easily concealed, it happens in cabins, in narrow corridors, even on the bridge. That turns what should be a personal health choice into an involuntary, crew-wide hazard.
I concede the mounting health evidence, and I think it's crucial that we approach those findings with a lot of intellectual humility. E-cigarettes are clearly not the harmless, flavored steam they were once marketed as a decade ago. But I really have to question the regulatory logic you are applying to this specific environment. Let's look at the reality on board. Traditional smoking is universally recognized as a leading cause of preventable disease globally. Combustible cigarettes produce massive amounts of tar, carbon monoxide, and known aggressive carcinogens. Yet we manage traditional smoking successfully via designated areas on these very same ships. If we can do that for traditional tobacco, why shouldn't e-cigarettes be managed exactly the same way?
Because the discrete nature of vapes means they won't stay in those designated areas.
But a ban doesn't solve that either. The aldehydes, the heavy metals, the fine particles you just mentioned. Treating vapes as tobacco solves the secondhand exposure issue immediately by confining those pollutants to heavily ventilated specific smoking rooms. We don't ban combustible cigarettes because we recognize the behavioral reality of the crew. These people are away from their families for 6 to 9 months at a time. Nicotine is a deeply entrenched coping mechanism. By telling a seafarer they can smoke a deadly, tar-filled combustible cigarette in the smoking lounge, but they will be fired and sent home for using an e-cigarette in that exact same lounge, we're implementing a policy utterly devoid of practical logic. It breeds resentment and non-compliance.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it strictly isolates the ship from the rest of the world. It ignores the complex international legal matrix that commercial shipping operates within. The health and fire risks on board are compounded exponentially by the massive global crackdown on e-cigarettes. This isn't just a matter of internal company policy or crew morale. It's a matter of international law, and the liabilities are staggering.
Are the legal liabilities really enough to justify fleet-wide prohibition?
Without question. Look at Singapore, which is one of the busiest transshipment hubs on the planet. E-cigarettes are completely, unequivocally banned there. Importers and sellers face fines of up to $20,000 and 12 months in jail. And it gets worse. By September 2025, if those vapes are found to be laced with drugs, they fall under Singapore's Misuse of Drugs Act. That carries up to 20 years in prison and caning. India instituted a nationwide ban back in 2019 with a 1 lakh rupee fine and prison time. Australia has made nicotine vapes prescription only, and violations can lead to multi-million-dollar fines and up to 7 years in prison. Vietnam, Thailand, Mauritius, they all have incredibly strict bans and severe penalties.
And customs officials do board and search the vessels.
Exactly. If a massive container vessel arrives in Singapore and port customs officials do a sweep and find undeclared vapes hidden in a crew cabin, it can trigger an immediate vessel detention. A single delay of a cargo ship's strained relations with charterers costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a day and compromises the vessel's insurance. A shipping company simply cannot assume this level of legal and operational risk just to accommodate a crew member's nicotine preference.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered how international shipping already successfully navigates complex contraband laws every single day? The legal landscape is treacherous, yes, but commercial vessels are incredibly adept at managing prohibited items. We do it all the time.
You mean like navigating restricted airspaces or managing hazardous cargo?
I mean, managing the crew's personal items. Consider alcohol. Ships routinely sail into dry countries or waters controlled by strict Islamic law where alcohol is completely banned under threat of severe penalty. Shipping companies don't ban alcohol fleet-wide to solve this problem. They don't tell a Russian or Filipino crew member they can never have a beer again just because the ship is going to Saudi Arabia next month. Instead, they utilize a standard, proven maritime procedure, the bonded store.
Okay, but a bonded store for alcohol is very different from collecting hundreds of tiny, easily hidden electronic devices.
The administrative principle is exactly the same, Before entering restricted waters like Singapore or India, a strict standard policy would require all crew members to declare their e-cigarettes. Those devices are then physically collected, logged on a manifest, and locked away in a sealed bonded store by the master of the vessel. The customs officials can see the seal. The bond is only broken, and the items returned to the crew once the ship is safely back in international waters. This is a routine, deeply established administrative task for any ship's captain. Implementing a total global ban on e-cigarettes across the entire fleet just to avoid customs fines in specific ports is a massive administrative overreaction. We already have a well-established logistical solution for contraband.
The bonded store solution is elegant on paper, but it relies entirely on a very fragile assumption that crew members will transparently declare their devices. But as we established earlier, the very culture of vaping, especially among younger seafarers, is heavily tied to its discreet nature. It's stealthy. If they fear confiscation, even temporary confiscation, or if they are heavily dependent on nicotine to get through a stressful 12-hour watch, they will hide them. And that brings me to perhaps the most sinister aspect of this entire issue: enforcement and the terrifying reality of the black market. The black market is exactly why I'm arguing against a ban.
But wait, let's look at what actually happens when vapes cross borders. Because vaping is heavily restricted in various parts of the world, we are seeing the emergence of black market vape liquids laced with highly dangerous additives. It's not just a matter of unregulated nicotine anymore. Reuters documented a deeply concerning trend in 2023, specifically in Singapore, regarding a substance called etomidate.
Etomidate?
Yes, etomidate is a potent clinical anesthetic. It's used in hospitals to put people under before surgery. Illicit vape pods laced with etomidate have been circulating widely in these ports. It leads to severe legal penalties, but more importantly, immediate, profound physiological impairment. Now take that reality and put it on a cargo ship. Imagine a watchkeeper standing on the bridge at 2 a.m., navigating a 100,000-ton vessel through a crowded strait, taking a hit from a black market vape they bought in port, not realizing it's laced with a clinical anesthetic. Or an engineer managing incredibly heavy, dangerous machinery, suddenly losing motor control. A comprehensive, zero-tolerance ban is the only way to firmly sever the ship's tie to these unregulated, lethal substances. Of course, this has to be supported. We can't just ban them and walk away. Companies must provide extensive nicotine replacement therapies, patches, gums, along with onboard wellness programs and stress management resources to help the crew transition safely.
But the black market argument highlights the exact paradox of prohibition. You just painted a terrifying, very real scenario of an engineer on etomidate. But an outright zero-tolerance ban is exactly what drives the proliferation of that black market on board the vessel in the first place. When you prohibit vapes entirely, you don't magically erase the demand. You don't instantly cure the nicotine addiction of a stressed-out crew navigating treacherous waters.
Providing nicotine patches addresses the addiction, though.
Maris, patches don't replicate the behavioral habit, which is why compliance is so low when bans are instituted. Instead of quitting, seafarers who rely on these devices are simply pushed into the shadows. Under a ban, they can no longer legally buy commercially regulated, quality-controlled products and use them transparently on the ship. Instead, they are forced to source illicit, easily concealable pods from black market vendors in loosely regulated, sketchy port areas just so they can sneak them past the ship's officers. That is precisely how you end up with laced pods containing substances like etomidate on board your ship.
So you're saying regulation protects them from the black market?
Absolutely. If, conversely, you allow vaping, but regulate it strictly, meaning crew members can use legitimate, commercially verified products openly in designated smoking areas, you completely eliminate the necessity for them to seek out dangerous, black market alternatives. You keep the activity visible, you keep the substances verifiable, and most importantly, you keep the crew from feeling like they are criminals for managing a habit that frankly is legally permitted in the vast majority of the world. Prohibition makes the ship more dangerous, not less.
It seems we are looking at the exact same set of catastrophic risks and arriving at fundamentally different regulatory philosophies. The maritime environment is uniquely unforgiving. There is no backup out there. The convergence of explosive lithium-ion battery hazards in unmonitored spaces, the unpredictable chemical exposure to the crew in sealed, recirculated compartments, and the extreme severity of global customs penalties, from vessel delays to prison time, requires highly decisive action. From my perspective, a definitive zero-tolerance ban is not about punishing seafarers. It is about protecting the vessel, the massive value of the cargo, and every single life on board from a multifaceted modern threat that traditional smoking policies were simply never designed to handle.
And I maintain that while e-cigarettes undeniably pose serious, multifaceted hazards, attempting to ban them outright is a deeply flawed strategy that completely ignores behavioral reality. We have seen time and time again that driving a habit underground guarantees worse outcomes. It guarantees that volatile batteries will be charged covertly in vulnerable areas, and it pushes crew members directly toward dangerous, unregulated black market products. Bringing e-cigarettes firmly under strict, existing smoking policies, managing them with the exact same rigorously controlled, well-ventilated frameworks we already use successfully for traditional tobacco, is the most practical, realistic, and ultimately safest way to actually mitigate these risks at sea.
Our premise today. E-cigarettes are far from a harmless lifestyle choice, especially not on a commercial vessel. Their presence in the isolated, highly pressurized maritime environment poses severe, potentially catastrophic risks. The industry simply cannot afford to be passive anymore. Urgent and deliberate action is required to address this rapidly evolving threat.
I completely agree with you on that. The status quo of treating e-cigarettes as a regulatory afterthought is no longer acceptable. The safety of the crew and the physical integrity of the vessel have to dictate a robust response, even as we continue to debate the specific mechanisms of what that response should look like.
Indeed, finding the intricate balance between crew welfare, operational safety, and navigating complex international law is a monumental challenge for modern shipping companies. There is much more to explore regarding maritime risk management in the source material we've discussed today. We will leave it to our listeners to weigh the merits of strict regulation versus complete prohibition. Thank you for joining us.